All righty, friends, we're going to get started. My name is Brian Bauman, and all of our pastors are gone at the Gospel Coalition this weekend in Indianapolis. So here I am introducing our first Wednesday talks. If you haven't been with us, all right, let's have a round of applause for our first Wednesday talks. Go ahead. Throughout the course of the year, on the first Wednesday of each month, we have various speakers come and talk about different things. This week, we have an opportunity to hear from the co-founder of Love and Transformation, of the Love and Transformation Institute. They are passionate about reaching our next generation. We have a society that struggles with anxiety, depression, stress, even suicide. And so there's tons of implications and impact that comes from being as connected as we are with these cell phones. So good things will happen tonight. We're going to hear some helpful insights. Our speaker is someone who graduated from Phoenix Seminary. He was also a professional golfer. He, his wife, and his 3 kids live in Meridian. So without further ado, I'm going to ask you to welcome with me Ben Bost. Come on up, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's nice to see all your pretty faces tonight. And so before I jump into the talk titled, You Are Not Your Smartphone, I want to give you a little bit of a tour of what we're going to do tonight. So I'm going to be here. I'm going to communicate for probably 35 to 40 minutes. Maybe if I run long, it'll be solely to wake up anybody that's sleeping. That's supposed to be funny. And I actually didn't plan that. I really didn't plan that joke. But I'm going to speak for 30 to 45 minutes, and then we're going to take a break. And you'll get like a 5 to 8 minute break, and then you'll come back, and we're going to have a panel discussion with myself from a kind of cultural, philosophical viewpoint on this issue we're talking about tonight. Cody Lindley, who's been a software engineer for, I think, since birth, maybe, is going to be handling kind of the technological side of things. And then his brother, Matt Lindley, who's in the behavioral health industry at St. Luke's and St. Alphonsus, will be handling kind of clinical and behavioral health questions related to this issue of digital technology and the impact that it's having on our lives. And so here's something that I want to make you aware of right now. We're using a technology tonight called Slido, and you'll be able to text or actually submit questions during the talk, and you'll be able to view it on your phone. All right, so on this slide right here, you'll see you can go to sli.do, type in this code, and if you want to put a question in for our panel discussion after, go there and do it. And you'll also be able to vote questions up. If you're like, hey, I'm thinking kind of about that same thing, and they pretty much said what I want to say, then you can vote it up to the top. So we'll have something to work with when we get to the panel discussion at the end. Good? So you get to use your phone during the talk. Sometimes if you come to a church and you're in service and worship and you pull your phone out, like you feel really subconscious, especially if you're looking at Facebook or Snapchat during a service. So tonight, you actually get to use it. And so that number will also be at the bottom left of pretty much every slide up there in case you need it. Good? Ready to go? Okay, so you are not your smartphone. This is a concept that I recently have become, I got asked to come here and communicate at the church for First Wednesday about the intersection between digital technology, the implications of it on our lives, the conditions of our society, the costs that we're facing as a result of it, and then being a follower of Jesus in the middle of the whole thing. And how do we navigate all this? What does this look like for us today in our current world, the current conditions of our lives, and the impact that this connected life that we all experience because of these things is having on us? And so, man, I could cover so much ground. There are so many layers of things that I could talk about related to that tonight. So I did the best that I could to try to pull something together that I thought would be very helpful for you all. It was great because it allowed me to take a lot of the research that I have been doing on these things, specifically related to our current society, anxiety and depression, and be able to really facilitate something around digital technology. And so when I was here and did the teaser a couple weeks ago, I said, really this question for me, the title, You Are Not Your Smartphone, is a hypothesis for me. I actually have a question. You are not your smartphone? So let's find out if you are or not your smartphone tonight. So I want a show of hands. How many of you talk on your phone? How many of you send text messages? How many of you send email from your phone? Receive email on your phone? Listen to music? No music. Some of you guys don't listen to music? We'll have to work on that after. Watch videos. Play games. Some book travel. Time travel. Just kidding. Like, use apps to monitor your sleep or anything else. Social media, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter. There's so many, I can't list them. But so you notice, right? I think if we actually look at it, and the reality of results when we start to talk about this, the amount of things that this does in our life now, you might actually be your smartphone. I don't know, but the hope is tonight you're going to realize you're actually not your smartphone. And this isn't just like a bright device with a brain that, does things for fun for us. It does a lot of things. But in reality, what this really is a life management device, an entertainment device. It does so much. Check this out. I'm running my entire presentation tonight off the cloud through Wi-Fi from my phone. That's amazing. I couldn't have imagined being able to do something like that when I was like 19 or 15 years old. Things have just changed so much. And so here's the interesting thing about this is technology is always changing. And technology is something that really benefits humanity and has for a long time. Even back to this guy. I don't know what kind of Fred Flintstone character this is. I just found this graphic online. The creation of the wheel. I don't know if it was actually cavemen that did it, but this would have been technology, something very beneficial and helpful for mankind. You had carriages come from it and all these different things. Not to mention he has a hammer in his hand. If we go all the way back to kind of the beginning of what technology actually looked like. Anybody know who these guys are, these characters? This is the Wright brothers. This is the first flight with the Kitty Hawk. This is man taking to the skies. And I go, here's what I really want to know, because these two guys on the right are the guys on the sides. What I want to know is who lost the bet and who's actually in the plane. Where did they find him, And what did they have to give him to convince him to get in that plane and do the first flight? But this was an example of technology of, man going into the air and believing that you can actually fly. How about this one, the Pony Express? So the Pony Express came into being really around the time of the gold rush because it took months for a letter to make it from one coast to the next. You're laughing because you're reading the advertisement, aren't you? Wanted young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18 must be expert riders willing to risk death at all costs or whatever, death daily, orphans preferred. They want you to die and they don't want to have to worry about anybody else, family members, wives, or anything, But here's the thing, they reduced it to 10 days or less. It was a 1,900-mile trip from Missouri to California, and the amount of people that it took to pull it off was insane. Just go look it up and read about it sometime, the Pony Express. And so here's the thing. This did not start like this. It actually started like this. Uh-oh, where is it? Right here. This is an example of an old classic phone, crank phone. This is origination of like where the phone began. And when this phone existed, there was a dispatcher. You would ring, call in. They would plug you in, and they would listen to your entire conversation as it went from one place to the next over a wire. And they're still listening to our conversations today, I think, on these devices that we have. But this is where this technology originated. This has become this, and so much more. But the reality is, what is the impact that this is having on our society? What kind of conditions exist for us now as a result of these technological advances? Smartphone was released in 2007. We've seen a lot of changes as a result of it. One of the changes that we've seen is an increase in anxiety and depression in our society. Right now, we sit at a time where the suicide rate has increased 70% ages 15 to 24. We're at a 30 to 40 year, depending upon what statistics you read, 30 to 40 year high of suicide in our culture. It's off the charts what's going on for people. It is a national health crisis. You may or may not know that. Suicide's the second leading cause of death among youth ages 15 to 24. What is going on? Now, a lot of people want to blame the smartphone. That's what they actually want to do. Here's a research report from Pew. They do really good work. And this is a stressed out anxiety, a bigger concern for teens than drugs or poverty. This is a pretty large sample size of research they did, that the next generation views anxiety and depression as 70% of them, the greatest problem they're facing. Not bullying, drug addiction, drinking alcohol, or poverty, teen pregnancy, or gangs. It's anxiety and depression. And there are people who want to blame this. They want to say, it's all the smartphone. And so one of these people, there's a book that was recently released. This gal, Jean Twenge, is a researcher from San Diego State. And she's been researching generations for over 25 years. This book has gotten a lot of publicity recently because it shows some graphs that show release of the smartphone in 2007 and the rise of anxiety and depression. So it just gives you data. It's like, okay, well, we can show a correlation between the two, so obviously this must be the case. I was actually talking with Cody today, and we were saying, if you're on a diet, trying not to gain weight, but you carry a cookie around all the time, and you continue to eat the cookie, would you blame the cookie? It's the cookie's fault that I'm getting fat. No, it's not the cookie's fault. Maybe it's you, or maybe it's something else going on, right? If you carry it around with you and it's constantly triggering you, what are you going to do with it? And so this reality of what she talks about, this rise of anxiety and depression and the smartphone, I don't know that we can necessarily blame the technology itself. It is doing some unique things, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Here's the thing. She kind of sets out and shows the data. I was reading one of the articles, and this is what I found. This is a quote from a guy who's a researcher at University of Texas, and he is an adolescent researcher in the sociology department. This is what he says. He says, there really isn't data that shows a strong connection between these two things, the smartphone and the rise of anxiety and depression. There is some data, but it's not conclusive, per se. He says, I think this increase in mental health issues is real and is something we need to be concerned about. But until we know exactly what's causing it, I don't think it's so easy for us to put the blame on any one thing. Krosno says, to explain the phenomenon, you have to look at the entire context of the historical moment we're living in. I think we are living in a time of great uncertainty, where people are unsure about the future of the country, but also their own futures, he says. And that is anxiety-provoking for anybody, but especially true for young people whose whole future is ahead of them. Here's the thing. If I say anything tonight that's not true of the next generation, you guys can boo me, because I need to learn to be better. So I'm open to really consistent, immediate feedback if you want to give it to me. Because it really is. I mean, this is a big deal. What are the conditions of what's going on? He's alluding to the fact that it's probably bigger than just what we have in our hands. And what I would say to you tonight is there is something that's going on that's been going on for a very long time. And I think it's some of the conditions that are behind what is being driven and what's happening inside here. It's not necessarily this, it's what this is facilitating, as well as many other things. Something that generations before us have also dealt with. And what I would say is it's competitive society. And you'd be like, well, competitive society, what are you talking about? Well, it's the reality that the Western society as it exists is one big competition. Think about it. And I'm going to peel back the layers on this for you in just a minute. Western society, to get ahead, it's wins and losses. It's get your own. It's the drive, it's the ambition, it's all of these things that are happening that people are jockeying for position, power, strength to get theirs, to achieve, to succeed. And competitive society has been happening for a really long time. The greatest generation dealt with it differently than the boomers did, than the Xers, Ys, millennials, millennial Ys, iGen or Gen Z. What happens is there's unique markers in every generation for how they dealt with competitive society. The greatest generation, it was the Great Depression and World Wars. You don't think a war is a big competition? Where it's death and somebody wins. And there's huge implications to that winning. And so This is a book that I came across about 5 years ago. And so if you just hang with me, I'm going to unpack this for you to help you see this portrait. The Happiness Industry is written by William Davies. He is a kind of a futurist thinker. He is from the University of London. And this book right here, the first 5 chapters, is basically a technical book about competitive economics in the United States and the UK post-World War II. That's really what it's about. It's super technical, and some guys who are like finance and econ, they love it, but I was like, just waiting to try to get through it. And he gets to about the 6th chapter, and the 6th chapter is titled The Crisis of Authority. And he goes on, and he's beginning to pull back the layers, and what he basically says, he asks this question, he says, what can we say that the competitive societies of the West, United States and UK, have actually given to us? And he says, a depressive disorder. He goes on to show how one of the first SSRIs, or depression drugs, was released, Prozac, in the late 80s. And he starts to peel back the layers, and he says in this chapter that one of the greatest causes, if not the greatest cause of anxiety and depression, is competition. And he goes on to document it. I can't go through all of it right now, but if you are interested in hearing what he's talking about and how he does that, I would encourage you to read it, just the 6th chapter. Get it on Audible, listen to it. You'll be like, you've got to be kidding me. This makes a lot of sense. Well, here's what happened to me, because Brian mentioned I was a professional golfer, which some people wouldn't say that's competition, but it actually is competition. It is a sport. I was told a lot when I was in high school, it's a game. Like, you're not an athlete. Tell that to Tiger Woods, right? So I read this, and I was reflecting on it again just recently. Like I said, I got it 5 years ago, and I was reflecting on it just recently, and a friend of mine came to mind. And I go, I think he went through this. I think this was true of him. And so I went to him, and his competitive environment of ambition and drive was the pastorate. He was a lead pastor of 2 mega churches in the Phoenix area. And I looked at my friend and I said, dude, this is what I read. I think this was true of you. I think this is what you experienced. Because if you don't know, being a pastor of a mega church is highly competitive and ambitious and can be really toxic. You might be like, no. And I'm like, yeah, the drive to get, to acquire, to have presence, more people, expand your presence, your influence. The pressure these guys feel is intense. And I know this from talking to many of them, but just my friend. I said, but I think this was you. And he goes, oh, totally. Like, that was totally my story. And then he looks at me and he goes, well, what about you? And I was like, well, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, weren't you a professional golfer? And I was like, well, yeah. And then I went, oh, I had never thought about that before. See, because I have a story of having struggled with anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation in my mid-20s. And I never thought about competition really contributing to that, the pressure that I felt to succeed and perform and produce and achieve. It was always my family of origin stuff, the fact that I was raised in a pretty emotionally abusive home, emotionally and verbally abusive home. My mom tried to commit suicide when I was 19. There was a bunch of things that went on. Both my parents had affairs, and they're still together. There was a lot of trauma in my house, even though my parents are great. I think they're listening right now. Hi, Mom and Dad. And I have a great relationship with them today, but there was a lot that went on that created difficulty for me. But I never accounted for the reality of competition in my life as an athlete. And so, why am I sharing all of this with you? Because I want to help you to see some things about the reality of our society that is being facilitated through technology and really turned up to a volume of 10. That's not my quote, that's Cody Lindley's perspective, and he'll probably say a little bit about that at the end. So here's what I want you to see, the 4 horsemen of competitive society. How is this playing itself out in our lives? Because a lot of times we hear the word competition, we think sport automatically, right? We go straight to sort of athletics. Competition is happening in layers in our society. First way is economic. Economic competition is a competition for power playing itself out in markets, politics, and industry. Is this happening? Corporations fighting for market share, taking place all the time. Politics, conservatives versus liberals. Who's going to own the ability for regulation or no regulation? Industry happening. So if you're brave, And I'll give my disclaimer on this. There's a new documentary that just came out called One Nation Under Stress. It was released by HBO. So if you're going to watch it, you'll have to go to HBO, knowing that there's some language in it and so there's some dead bodies and stuff. Just letting you know. But it is a really insightful documentary that was produced by Sanjay Gupta, who is the CNN doctor. And the reason he went out to do this is because he noticed life expectancy among the white working class in the United States declined 2 years in a row. And he's like, what's going on? This has never happened before. So he was going to go out and find the reasons why. And while they were doing the documentary, he learned that it happened for a third year. Where they filmed the majority of the documentary was in western Pennsylvania, actually where I was born. I was born in Pittsburgh. And if you know anything about that part of the country, it was steel mills and factories back in the 70s. In the late 80s, all those things got shut down and they tore them down. People lost their jobs because of changes in economic and industry and competition. So he's there, he's interviewing people in this documentary who recently lost their jobs because of factory changes. And these are blue-collar, hardworking people who would work the same job their entire life. Now they can't find work. What do? How do they continue on? And he chronicled several people who took their life because of the hopelessness they had because they couldn't find work. It's a result of economic competition. Somebody wins and somebody loses. The second one's academic. This is a competition for ideas playing itself out in schools and universities. This is a philosophical competition that's been happening for a very long time, really since the Enlightenment came to our culture. But in universities, what you have is this wrestling and battle for what are the ideas that are going to shape our societies. And you're in school. Who's in school right now? College or junior high or high school, right? You hear all kinds of stuff every day from your teachers and in your books that hopefully some of that you question. You're like, where's this coming from? How long's it been around? Is it actually right? Well, this is a result of philosophical ideas playing itself out in universities for an indoctrination of a society. It's a competition for ideas that's happening in academia. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The next one's athletic. I'm very familiar with this one. This is a competition for our time, playing itself out on our weeknights and weekends. Now, this may not apply to everybody, but here's the deal. When I was a kid, I played baseball. I played Little League. It was just rec league. I'd go to one practice on Thursday. I'd have a game on Saturday. And after the game was over, I'd go to concessions. I'd get a huge flat of cheesy, nasty nachos and a thing of Big League Chew, and I'd go sit in a bleacher with my friend, and I'd watch a game, and we'd have a blast. That's what I would do. This is not baseball today. Baseball today, the professionalization of youth sports is insane. It's off the charts. And the Treasure Valley is addicted to sport. Some of you, if you're involved in it, you know that. I mean, just how do we like the Boise State Broncos? Like, the world revolves around Boise State Broncos. Football in the fall, doesn't it? But more club sports, when you think about the reality of the club sports culture, baseball today, if you're any good, they're like, oh, you should play club. And then you join the club team. Then you got to get a hitting coach. Then you got to get an agility coach. Then you got to get a sports psychologist. It's 7 days a week, 365, no breaks, and you're going to school. Is anybody in club sports in here? No? But you know this exists. And they're all at practice. That's right. Very good. See, there's always a really smart one in the room.
My son did club basketball in third grade, and it was a massive time commitment for 4 months. It was probably an hour and a half to get there, round trip, driving hour and a
Right?
half for an hour and a half of practice. So that was, 9 hours a week with practice and driving.
And it cost you your weeknights and weekends, didn't it?
Yeah.
100%.
And Sunday was off.
It's like, how did we get here? And you talk to some of these parents, and it's like, dude, my kid's going to play D1 ball, and then he's going to go on to the pros, and you do not want to get in the way of that guy if you're a coach. That kid better get playing time. I heard a story recently of a dad where they actually had to call CPS on this dad because he was so belligerent to his son from the crowd and the bleachers, like verbal abuse, that they had to take care of the issue. It is out of control. Not to mention that you just travel the country and look at the stadiums for professional sports. It looks like Roman Colosseums, don't they? All of them. This is not that far from Rome. I mean, we're Rome 3.0, essentially. That's what's going on. So that's the athletic, and then the social. This is the one I'm most interested in talking about tonight as we kind of move into the next part of the talk. The social competition, one that's playing itself out in social media. It's a competition for who's happiest, playing itself out in social media in non-reality. That's a game nobody wins. You have to realize that. Social media, as you know, I can go on social media and Instagram because my wife and I like to remodel houses, and I can set up a whole part of my house to look super beautiful, take a picture, post it, and everything out here looks like trash, but no one will ever see it. I can just show the best parts of my life. This isn't anything new. You guys know all of this. But imagine having non-reality paraded in front of you constantly at a speed that you can't control. That eventually does something to you. And you have these unrealistic views of life that are happening, and you're trying to keep up with it. How do we deal with that? How do we work through it? So this social competition is no longer keeping up with the Joneses. It's not this, my neighbors, he just got a boat, nicer car, maybe they remodeled their house, and I feel the pressure to try to compete. It's not that anymore. This has moved into a space where it's now you against the world, against Beyonce, Kanye, Kim Kardashian, Alex Rodriguez, J-Lo, everybody, the whole scope of people, any musician you like, all of your friends, and anything being paraded in front of you at the speed of light, at a pace you can't keep up with. It's complete overload. You got to think that does something to you. If you give yourself to it over a long period of time, not to mention the constant communication going on just in the text message realm or direct message places. So this is where our social competition has moved to. I want to add an element to the social competition. Any of you see recently that there are major universities in our country that are in a fraud and scandal because people have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to get their kids into these schools like USC, UCLA, Georgetown, Georgia Tech, Yale. You see this? There's an actress, Lori Loughlin, who's one of the accused that they paid $500,000 to get her daughters into USC as rowing recruits. Funny thing is, those girls have never rowed anything. So they fabricated the test results, took pictures of them in boats, bribed a coach to get them in. Supposedly, this is what went on. According to them, they're not guilty. Right? But these are the kinds of things that are happening. Why? Because of the status, the pressure that they feel to compete. And if you have enough money, a lot of times you can get what you want in our society. Isn't that true? If you got the money, you can get what you want. And so this is a little backdrop. I call it the four horsemen of competitive society. How does this land on us? Like, what is the pressure that we feel? And how do we relate to that pressure? It's what I would call this, the competitive cocktail of four things: ambition, competition, humanism, and relativism. So this is really kind of the condition of competitive society. Ambition being the drive, your passionate desire to achieve, to have position, power, wealth, status, you name it. This drive that's inside of us to go get it. The vehicle to accomplish your ambition is competition. I win, you lose. If there's two people going for a promotion, do both people get that promotion? No, they do not. There's a winner and there's a loser. That's the reality of competitive society. This is what we all face. We face this stress and pressure to give into it, to have to deal with it. And the reality is it's not going away. It is the reality of our society, and we have to figure out how to live in it and deal with it. But there are philosophical conditions that are driving competitive society as well. Humanism is one of them. Humanism is basically the idea that self is the end authority. Like there's nothing bigger than us. You are the final judge of your reality in life, and you judge it all based on your emotions. If it feels good, do it. If it feels good, it's true. Have you ever heard the statement, find your truth? Anybody heard that before? Your truth is your truth. Become the best version of yourself. Here's the reason becoming the best version of yourself is a bad idea. You're the only judge. How do you know if you're actually the best version of yourself anyway? What if what you decided today was the best version, it's different tomorrow? That's a lot of pressure. Man, would I love to have some type of standard that is a good, healthy one that leads to well-being and happiness that I could go, yeah, I want to look like that. See, that's what's missing from our society. The kind of virtues that are developed in a person to help them live healthy life with and build healthy culture in their well-being. So the second part is relativism, an absence of truth, morality, and ethics. So there's no longer a truth. Morality's been taken, extracted from things, and what is the right thing to do anymore? It's very confusing. The competitive cocktail, this is what we all face when we live in competitive society. If you live in the West, this is your life. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to change tomorrow. And we have to figure out how to navigate this as followers of Jesus. Davies references a psychologist in his book, Happiness Industry, and he says, American psychologist Tim Kasser has revealed that aspirational values oriented around money, status, and power are linked to a higher risk of depression and a lower sense of self-actualization. Wherever we measure our self-worth relative to others, as all competitions force us to do, we risk losing our sense of self-worth altogether. It's kind of where we end talking about competitive society. But the last thing I want to share with you is this. What kind of suicide's actually happening today? Why are people actually taking their lives? Here's the thing. What I've suggested to you tonight is basically this. I think what I've just shared with you is having an effect on us. I can't say that for sure. I'm not clinical. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a cultural observer guy who used to chase a white ball around for a living. I did go to seminary, and I like to read. But the reality is there are very, very smart people who've been thinking about these things for a long time. This is one of them. His name's Émile Durkheim. He was a French sociologist, wrote a book titled Suicide in 1897. The reason that book is important is because it gave 4 typologies for suicide, reasons people take their life. And in that book, he had one condition called anomic suicide. I'm going to read to you the description of what anomic suicide is. And I want you just to think about our culture as you read it, or as I read it to you, okay? Anomic suicide. Durkheim linked this type of suicide to disillusionment and disappointment resulting from a condition where social and moral norms are confused, unclear, or simply not present. He coined the sociological term anomie, meaning a sense of aimlessness, despair, and social disconnection that arises from the inability to reasonably expect life to be predictable. In this kind of society, individuals lack a sense of social regulation and feel unguided in the choices they have to make. He also believed the lack of norms led to deviant behavior. Any deviant behavior come to your mind when you think about what that might look like and be? How that plays itself out? Anomie is propelled by periods of rapid social, economical, and political, I even added in there technological, change that leads to an inability to regulate emotion. So basically, it's like putting somebody in a whirlwind, spinning them around. It creates anxiety, depression, and they don't know how to regulate it. They can't find a way to manage what they're feeling inside because there's so much coming at them that they don't know how to regulate their emotional state. How hard is that to do, especially if your emotions are the single thing that you're using to judge whether something's right or wrong? That's really tough. As an expression of suffering, people begin taking their lives. I don't know about you, but when I read this, I was like, because here's the thing, I've had a window into seeing not only working with people who are struggling with suicidal ideation, talking to people in the next generation, reading plenty of articles. This is happening. I would suggest to you that some of this is the impact of what's happening. It's not just loneliness and feeling hopeless. Hopelessness doesn't just show up. It happens for reasons. And so I think this describes our culture. I don't know about you. You would have to decide for yourself. 2 examples. 1, there was a girl in Massachusetts, 17 years old, beautiful, smiley, high school girl, honor roll society. Some of you may have seen this story. She had just gotten back from a vacation with her family, wakes up one morning, makes her bed, walks to a bridge and jumps. No signs, no diagnosed anxiety and depression. She left behind 2 journals full of self-loathing, how she hated herself. Another one was an athlete, an Olympic athlete recently. You may have seen this one. She won a silver medal in Rio de Janeiro in the Olympics. She was also a computational math major at Stanford who took her life. Her words about her own life was, "I have so much required of me in my life that if I had time travel, I could not get it all done. Stuff would still fall through the cracks." The pressure and the stress that's being put on us and on the next generation, unrealistic expectations for life. I found one research report that was done by British researchers. They surveyed 41,000 college students from 1980 to 2016, basically trying to find out what their lives were like. The results of that research report was basically this. It said that there is a hyper-perfectionism in this current generation where they're trying to live up to such unrealistic standards and pressure for life that their anxiety and depression has gone up, a hyper-perfectionism like they've never seen in any generation in the past. So I'm just passing this on to you. I don't know if you're experiencing this, if you encounter it. Certainly anybody in here under the age of 30, I would love to talk to you. I would love to hear you and either come say, no, that's not it, or come tell me what you think you're experiencing if you're feeling any of this. Because my heart is, and what God has given me the opportunity to do, is to go around the country and talk to people about it, to kind of raise the conversation. So we're going to transition. That was the conditions. Is this the conditions of the society that we're in? I think it is. What is the cost to us as followers of Jesus? What does this mean for us? How do we navigate this as we follow Christ? How do we work through it in our own lives? Well, the cost is going to happen to us in one of 2 ways. It either happens in our influence or it happens in our own fulfillment. And so the passages that we're using here where I'm going to talk about this, the top ones are Matthew 28, 18 to 20, and Mark 12, 28 to 34. Matthew 18 is the Great Commission, and Mark 12 is the Great Commandment, or the Great Commandments. Right? We're going to look at those. That is our influence. Think about what we've been left behind to do. What is the sole purpose of the church? The thing, if you cornered Jesus and asked him, Jesus, what's it all about? What's the one thing that it's all about? What would he say? What would you give me? One word. Huh? Love. That's not my words or my opinion. I think when you look at the passages, Jesus is asked what's the greatest commandment? It's love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, love your neighbors yourself. John 13, 34 and 35, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. They will know you're my disciples by your love for one another. So really the purpose of the church, our sole purpose is to teach people how to love. That's why we've been left here. But I don't know. Talk to a lot of people who are followers of Jesus and they'll give you a different answer. Normally out of some theological system that they value over love itself. And they got ones that have flowers associated with them. They have all kinds of stuff, like, we're going to do it this way. And you won't find love anywhere in it. And yet if you ask Jesus, if you corner him, like the lawyer did when you asked him about the great commandment, it's love the Lord your God and love your neighbors yourself. And so these are the 2 areas of cost. First, our influence. Jesus came and told his disciples, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I've given you, and be sure of this, I'm with you till the end of the age. We're to move out into our world carrying, what did Jesus command? There's not a whole lot of times in the New Testament where Jesus actually uses the word command or commandment. When you look at it, it's about 10 times. And love is always associated in there. And so we are to go out and teach people to obey, to learn how to love. This is like super amazing, folks. Like, this is the greatest call you could ever have on your life. Because there's nothing that transforms a person more than love itself. And that's what we've been given. That's what we've been left behind to do, is to train people how to love. In one of the accounts of the Great Commandment, this is what you have. The lawyer corners him. One of the teachers of religious law was standing there listening to the debate. He realized that Jesus had answered well, So he asked, of all the commandments, what is most important? Jesus replied, the most important commandment is this: listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is one and only Lord, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important: love your neighbors yourself. No commandment is greater than these. The teacher of the religious law replied, well said, teacher. There's probably a little sarcasm in there, I think. You have spoken the truth by saying there is only one God and no other. And I know it is important to love him with all my heart and all my understanding and all my strength, and to love my neighbor as myself. This is more important than to offer all the burnt offerings and sacrifices required by the law. So this is a religious lawyer who in the time regulates people's religion with basically law. And he says, notice this: love is more important than religion itself, sacrifices and offerings. So go do your religion, but in God's book, it doesn't matter. It's how we love, the quality of our love toward one another first and then toward the world around us. Realizing how much the man understood, Jesus said to him, you're not far from the kingdom of God. In my terms, the way I read the Bible, when he says you are not far from the kingdom of God, this is what I hear: close. You're close, but you got a long way to go, because you still value your religion over what this is really all about. These two passages articulate very succinctly our influence. This is what we have. This is so special to us as followers of Jesus. It makes us distinct from everybody else on this planet. And this is, in a sense, what's at stake. If I give myself into competitive society and I allow it to control me in the 4 areas that I'm going to show you in just a second, this gets compromised. My ability to love goes down. And it's these 4 areas: my emotional, and so these correlate with the great commandment. Emotional is heart, relational is soul, intellectual is mind, vocational is strength. My emotional, if I give into competitive society and the anxiety and the pressure that I feel in the world around me, I can very well start judging reality based on my emotion and not truth. I could take my heart and allow my heart to command my life in such a way that it is now dictating everything. And I'm triggering it constantly with things that produce anxiety in me, because I don't know how to regulate. So instead of loving God with my heart, I end up judging my reality with emotion, and I really struggle to love God or others in an emotional, have healthy desire and healthy passion for life. The second, relational, you become disconnected from others. Would you guys agree that digital technology or social media has caused a disconnection socially and relationally for people? Yes or no? So, an effort to love God well and love others well there's a relational aspect. How easy, you might say, hey, I can love people really well in digital technology. I'll just send them direct messages, or I'll, send them emails, tell them how much I love them, how much God loves them. I'll send them text messages, or I'll do it on Snapchat with goofy photos of me saying, God loves you. You could do that, but the reality is love itself transfers from one person to another like an electrical current in relationship. This benevolent concern for another person's well-being, which is one of the dictionary definitions of love, it goes from one person to another in relationship. If we become disconnected from others, it's hard for us to love God with our soul. The next one, intellectual, unable to think rightly about life. If your mind is not able to process knowledge, it's not just about information, there's knowledge and wisdom. There's thinking rightly about life. I was with a 15-year-old kid recently who's struggling with suicidal ideation, and you know what he said to me? He's like, the conversation with my friends is, everybody tells us what we're supposed to believe. He's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to believe. I need someone to help me think about life again. Someone needs to teach me how to think about life. I'm like, wow, this is what you guys are talking about? So our intellectual ability to love God and others can be compromised. And then the last one, vocational. Work has no meaning beyond self. Your job just exists to satisfy you and please you, to make you enough money so you can exist in this life. There's no meaning beyond that. So if we look at the Great Commandment in these categories, this reality, I think, exists. We have an opportunity to do this in a very healthy way. The last part of the cost is this, our fulfillment. And so, dare me say this, our happiness, I want to suggest that that is a reality for us, that Jesus cares very much and very deeply about our happiness, our sense of well-being in life. And I'm going to use a passage that wouldn't often get used to talk about this. So the foot washing of Jesus in the upper room discourse, a few hours before he gets arrested, you guys probably know, if you've read your Bibles, you know this passage. Jesus sits down, he takes his robe off, he goes to wash Peter's feet, and Peter tells him, no, you're not supposed to do that, this is way too far for you, too humbling for you. And Jesus rebukes him and say, no, I need to do this. And so he ends up performing this act for his disciples in front of them. This is his last moments with his disciples, kind of giving a download of how you live life as a follower of his. And this is what he says at the end of it. He says, when he had washed their feet and put on outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash others' feet. For I have given you an example that you should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I actually think this is a passage about happiness, not servant leadership or being humble. Because Jesus' word that he uses to describe happiness all throughout his teachings is that word right there, blessed. What he's saying here is, if you know how, if you've been developed to a certain place, formed in such a way in his love to give yourself away on behalf of others, you will be happy. That's where it's found. And yes, is servant leadership in there or humility in there? But you can go read the Sermon on the Mount, and some translations of the Bible actually read, blessed are those, or happy are those who are peacemakers, happy are those who know how to mourn, happy are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Jesus, I think, here is saying, here's an example of how to be happy. Be formed in such a way in love to know how to give yourself away. And so, to conclude this, before we break and go into a time of panel where Cody and Matt are going to come up, where does this leave us? We've talked about the conditions of our society. We've talked about the cost. Knowing what we know now, what is the greatest thing we have? Love. What is the greatest need of our society? What do people need today? I think what they need is hope. My phone's trying to update. Sorry. There it is, hope. Gets in the way sometimes when you're doing really important things. So this is our opportunity. There is a huge opportunity for us today. If people are really struggling in the way the statistics are showing with anxiety and depression, hope, that's what they need. Folks, this is an incredible opportunity for the church to move out into our world and meet people in their suffering and give them the greatest message of hope that has ever existed in the history of mankind. Can you see it? This opportunity before us to get out of this room and be in relationship with people, to do something that is not being done as much today, is our opportunity. This is the challenge that we have, to go love and love well, to be loved, to be in relationship, to move into the lives of other people. And we will see transformation. Incredible opportunity for us. And so my hope is that this guy's not right. Albert Einstein said, I fear the day that technology will surpass our human interaction. The world will have a generation of idiots. Human interaction is the ability to be in relationship with one another. And so my encouragement is just setting the tone for our discussion tonight. I hope that you have submitted some questions. Maybe you haven't. We're going to look at those in a second after the break. If not, there's going to be a mic. You can ask questions. But the goal is to take what we've talked about, or the kind of what I've laid. It took me 50 minutes to do it. Thank you for staying with me. I was given an hour, so I'm still in by 10. That's success in my book. And I don't feel like I said anything stupid. That's also success for me. So we're going to break in just a second to do that. But my hope is that this will not be true, that we will lean into relationship, that we will seek to do that. in deep and significant ways. So when we come back together and we have some time of dialogue, I really want all of us to engage around this discussion. This is a very important conversation we're having. And to talk about the cultural and philosophical realities, the impact of technology, but also behavioral health and mental health issues, I think it's just an opportunity for us to really learn from one another. And so before we do that, before you break, we'll take like a 5 to 8 minute break. This will be just a short commercial for Love and Transformation Institute. So we are actually hosting a symposium in Scottsdale, Arizona on May 18th at Phoenix Seminary on anxiety, depression, and suicide. We have a great group of folks that will be communicating that day. If any of you know who J.P. Moreland is, he's wrote a book called The Lost Virtue of Happiness, Love God with Your Mind. He's at Talbot Seminary at Biola. He's a philosophy and metaphysics professor. Great thinker. He's one of our keynotes. Another guy named Tim Jennings, who's actually a board-certified psychiatrist, who's written 2 books, The God-Shaped Brain and The God-Shaped Heart. He's one of our keynotes. My co-founder of Love and Transformation Institute, Kent Delhousset. Yours truly, I'll be there. And then a gal named Katie McPherson, who's also a youth mental health advocate. She travels speaking on that issue. And then we have an interview with a mental health pastor from Saddleback Church that I went out and shot a few weeks ago. But that's what this day is about. And if you want to be there, find a way to get to Scottsdale. We'd love to have you. I think we have 100 people registered. It's going to be a really interesting day looking at this topic. The second thing is this. We will actually be releasing our first curriculum around those 4 areas of emotional, relational, intellectual, and vocational. It's called the 4 Dimensions of Human Health. Personal development experience. This is something that's coming in May as well. And so if you're interested in what we do as an institute and the things that we're working on, this is something else you can do right now if you want. If you want to send us a text, open your messages, put 39492 in the sender field, or in the to, who you're going to send it to, and type in LTI info and just send that, and it'll opt you in, and you can get information from us in the future about everything that we're doing, whether it's 4 Dimensions of Human Health, our symposiums, a variety of things that we're working on. So I just wanted to give that to you because I didn't know if we would have time at the end, so I wanted to make sure I did that now. So we're going to break for 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll come back together for a panel discussion. Thanks for listening. do this little discussion around some questions. And so we're also going to have, so we have all of this that's been sent in, kind of voted up, and then we're going to have a mic that's roaming around too. I think we have a wireless, is that right? Do we have a wireless, Jared? Yeah, okay. So if you didn't text anything in or send anything in through Slido, you can just say, hey, I don't do that kind of thing, give me the mic. And you can ask your question that way. So we'll have some time for that. So look, we got here, first question. Is there any good reason to put these devices in the hands of a 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old, and 16-year-old? That is a great question. That's the one you predicted would be first. So I actually want to hear from both of you guys on this. So behavioral health, kind of the mental health side, clinical side, technological side. I'm all ears on this one because I have a 13, 11, and 8-year-old. You want to go first, Matt?
Sure. Well, first of all, you're your child's parent, so please don't feel trumped by any of my opinions. You know your child much better than I do. Go with that. I've talked to lots of parents that are like, absolutely not, and I've talked to some responsible parents that are very involved in their children's life. They're all over their technology. They're screening it. They're watching it. They've told their children, I'm screening and watching it. Communication with family, I think, is a good reason. There's still old phones. You can give your kid 25 cents to call you, I think you're going to see arguments and debate as soon as anyone says yes or no. Use your wisdom, and you know your child best. I was raised by a counselor, and my dad, our dad, he had a bit of the philosophy of, I don't know about 10, but at 12, you want to start. I would endorse this. You want to start giving your kids a little bit of leash to make some mistakes. They're gonna make mistakes. When I gave these devices to my kids, I'm like, you're gonna screw up with this. I know you are. And I'm not here to crush you when you make a mistake, but to point you right back in the right direction. I had a friend in high school who grew up in a Lutheran minister's home, and he was controlled his whole life. And that's, the stakes are kind of high when you're in the ministry. If your family's amok, you're disqualified. So I kind of get that. But I think there's some wisdom with giving a little leash and see how they do. Oh, wow, you did that great. Kind of like if you lend the car and it comes back clean and shiny and undented and they put gas in it. Wow, you're being responsible with this. You're earning some trust with me. That's the way I would proceed. If you give 2 inches and it's a mess, reel it back in and point them in the right direction. And I would be concerned about parents not monitoring. I think you need to have a watchful eye.
And so I think this third question kind of connects with this. I feel my kids spend too much time in front of screens. What do you think the danger is here? Is the content the danger or something else? So from a kind of a mental health or behavioral health side, address that aspect as well. And then, Cody, I think I'd like to hear you address that from the technological side.
Did you want to get to the first question too? Yeah. I know he does.
I think I'm going to offer what I think is a good reason, and it simply is that while your child's in your home, you want an opportunity to educate and train them with a technology that's not going anywhere. That is the opportunity. These ages are the opportunity to, as my brother said, to release a certain amount of this technology into their hands and walk with them and train them and work with them through the issues of the influences of technology on our lives. And that's going to be a big issue for the next generation. Mm-hmm. My personal goal is to make sure that they have that training before they leave my house. So that would be before 18.
Sorry, I just realized brought something up in my first comment. Anyway, my friend that was brought up in this Lutheran minister's home, and I mentioned the difficulty of when you're in the ministry and how there's a lot of times a heavy hand on your kids, is when my friend left after he turned 18, he went hog wild with freedom and because he'd always been told no, and there was so much external control, and you know, we can control people externally, and we do, and there's limits to what I'm saying, obviously, but what we really want is for our children to internally adopt what our values are, what God tells us to do, and to see that being a wellspring in them and them acting on that. I mean, that's what we want to cultivate in our children, not all these walls where we've made all the decisions for them and they haven't had the opportunity to make a mistake or the opportunity to do something great and have you dump praise on them. Wow, look what I caught you doing. I'm amazed. Good job. That's going to serve you well.
So what's the danger? Is it content? Is it time spent? Is it changing our brains? I mean, all of this stuff's out there, right? Everybody's got questions about it. It's kind of the what's up there? Yeah, the third or fourth that's up there. It moved down. Yeah, it got voted down. But yeah, what about it? I mean, certainly content's an issue. I mean, there's so much stuff you can find out there that's
Yeah, no
harmful.
argument there. It's kind of like releasing your children into the wild, and you know there's danger in the forest. It's not if, it's when they run into it. So yeah, back to my first statement. I would feel like I was irresponsible as a parent if I wasn't monitoring what my children were doing with their technology. And I've straight up told them, here you go, have fun, I'm watching you, just so you know.
I told my kids when they start driving, I told them this morning actually, I said, here's the deal. Unlike when I started driving, I could go away and my parents had no idea where I was at. Once you get a phone, there's a GPS. I'll know everywhere you are. And if you try to do anything silly or leave it somewhere, I will find you and I will discipline you. Because you can track them now. It's amazing what can be done, you know? And I'm sure there's ways around that, but.
I'll tell a little story. I took a Facebook off of my phone one January, probably half as a resolution, half as a test. And what I noticed is my thumb pushed the spot where that little icon was for about 2 weeks, even at the subconscious level. I knew it wasn't on my phone. I was not consciously thinking I want to check my social media. I had picked up that phone so many times and pushed that spot where that app was so many times. My finger was doing it without even thinking about it. And that scared me a little bit. I mean, the same is true with lots of mechanical things you do over and over again. It just becomes, you know, your muscle memory's there and your body's thinking it, but before you're consciously doing it. So yeah, I mean, the dopamine hit from seeing how many likes you have on a picture. I mean, human beings get addicted to gambling, to exercise, to winning, to
Competition.
It's anything that you get a little dopamine hit from can be problematic.
Yeah, so content danger. Yeah, so I feel my kids spend too much time in front of screens. What do you think the danger is here? Is it content or something else?
I have a lot to say about this, so limit me if I start rambling on. I think one of the super important things to realize about being connected or being on the internet or being on your phone is that I didn't make this saying up, somebody online did, but basically if you're not paying for it, you are the product. And the problem is that everything is designed around a human being a product. So the danger really is that we train ourselves, and adults are just as, I mean, you could ask this question for adults as well. What is the danger? The danger is that you're the product and you don't even realize it. And everything that is done on the internet, on your phone, on apps that you use, it is all targeted to get you to use it more because you're the product. You're what's making the money. And so to me, the danger is not realizing that, not educating our children that that is the case. So I think you have to be really clear on that, first of all, that if you're not paying for it, you're the product, and that means something. Somebody's after you, somebody's manipulating you, somebody's trying to get you to do something. And to me, that's a huge danger. I think you have all of the normal dangers, which are, whether we like it or not, the way I've heard this expressed is that we created this technology, but this technology is now creating society. I mean, think of the things that have changed because of a smartphone. It has drastically rewritten society. And I don't think, if you don't understand that and come to a healthy appreciation of that mechanism at work in our society, there's huge dangers there.
Well, and I think share a little bit about the impact it had on you, because you've been a part of building this stuff for a really long time, and you have a personal story with the impact that it had on you, not necessarily knowing how to regulate it at the beginning. I mean, share a little bit. I think they would benefit from hearing some of that.
Yeah, so 20 years ago when I started sitting in front of a computer full-time, 8 to 10 hours a day, I was able to sit and be in the context of what I was doing with a single purpose. I would have a program open, I'd be writing code. Slowly over time, what ended up happening is we got email, then we got instant messaging, then we got custom instant messaging tools, then we got texting, then we connected it all. And all of a sudden, when I sit down at my computer, I am constantly doing a contextual switch. So, and maybe you guys feel like this with your phones, but how often does the phone not go off in an hour with either an email, a text, a phone call, or a notification from some application on your phone that treats you as a product? It's constant. Well, for me, about 2 years ago, I had this realization that I no longer had the ability to participate in long-form thinking. And so when you're writing code, a lot of times you start building on an idea, and time will pass, an hour will pass, 3 hours will pass, 4 hours will pass, and you're just building knowledge on top of knowledge on top of knowledge, and it's this long-form thinking. And what I had realized is over time that my brain had changed, that without that dopamine hit, without that contextual switch, I never felt at ease. I always desired that next indication that something was going on. And that, for me, was when I realized that I had to start regulating these tools, because the tools are designed to do exactly what I think I just explained.
And so to overlap, there's a question here about scientific studies that are showing how too much screen time is changing the wiring of our brains from all of this dopamine related to this addictive aspect of digital connected life. Like we were talking earlier today, Cody, you said the difference between this and maybe the wheel or man taking flight is this stuff actually does something. It's addictive. And so Matt, can you speak to, or Cody, can you speak to the reality of the rewiring of the brain? And is there ways to change it? Anything that you're aware of? Obviously, there's a lot of conversation today about neuroscience and neuroplasticity. If any of you guys read that our brains are malleable. They're not actually fixed, that they can be rewired. But what are you guys aware of as far as the effects it's having on the brain?
Yeah, I'll hand this off to my brother after I say this. Make no mistake about it, the phone is designed to get your attention. It is, you are carrying it around, and hopefully you understand that it is designed to keep you engaged in what is going on the phone. And the reason we know this is true and problematic is because the people who build the operating systems are now building the proper tools into it to regulate yourself from it. So if you're an iOS user on Apple, you can now monitor how much time you're using, limit it, limit the hours in which applications are available. They recognize that there's a problem, And in my field, it's an epidemic. People are leaving the field because of this, because we've been engaged in this for 10 plus years, and it's just now hitting the general society in my mind. But it is engineered, and they know it because they're providing tools to regulate it.
Yeah, they have to regulate it. Now, my wife hates this, by the way. So, on her iPhone now, there's this app that tells you how long that you've been using your phone. I haven't updated mine because I don't want to know. And she gets frustrated because, she goes on, checks the weather, and it says that she's been on 10 seconds. It says she's been on a minute. So she yells at it. She goes, "No, I haven't. I haven't been on." So it's cheating. So they create it, make sure you get addicted, and then they shame you for using it too much. This is a beautiful thing that we're existing in, isn't it? What do you got to say about the changes of the brain?
Well, I don't know. When I was listening to you speak, I was trying to, there's a little bit of me here that feels like, back to the iPhone for a second. It's in your hand, you're touching it, it makes noise, you're looking at it. That's 3 different senses right there. So I think it is a little bit more pernicious than.
That's a big word.
You're insidious.
Oh, there we go.
It's a little more than a TV or, playing sports or exercising. There's a lot more going on with it. So I think it's good to be aware of that. But I just couldn't help but think of Vanity Fair in The Pilgrim's Progress. This whole world is screaming for our attention all the time, and it's easy to get distracted. So this is just another form of that, and it's really good at it. But we could go back to the 80s, and my grandpa Charlie called the TV the ruination of America because people sat down and they plopped in front of it and they stared endlessly into it. And people still do that. You can do that too much. So I think being aware is good, but I also, there's nothing new under the sun. Maybe this is because of all of those senses, and it's reaching out to you. Usually the problem is human beings reaching out, but it's reaching out to you. It's reaching out and trying to grab you. And it took me 2 weeks to quit pushing. I was like, I just laughed every time I did it. I'm like, I wonder how long I'll do that. It was 2 weeks when I stopped pushing the place where that app was.
Anybody experience what I call the phantom buzz? Like if you keep your phone in your pocket and it's not in there, you're shaking your head. Yes, you do this too. I'm not the only weirdo in here. That's great. Like where I feel like there's a buzz in my pocket, but my phone's not in there. It's like, what's going on? It's so weird. Like nervous system. Like it's creepy almost.
That's called synesthesia, I think.
Oh, it's got a name.
I think
That's,
I know.
Okay.
I
of course
think
you.
It's like a good example is you can cross your fingers and you're supposed to use a pencil, but you can lay your other finger in it and close your eyes and move it around. And your brain says that's 2 things, but it's really just one because your fingers aren't used to feeling one thing on the outside of your fingers.
Whoa.
So when a cat brushes past you or your keys shift in your pocket, because so many times that's the phone using your tactile senses saying, "Oh, I have a message," it'll trick your brain.
Yeah. All right, so here's the thing. This whole first Wednesday, I think, is slated for like an hour and a half, right? So we're at 8:30. Like, if you want to leave and go, you can. You're welcome to do it. We're not going to be offended. We'll sit here and keep going through some questions, and we'll close it at 8:45, I guess, or something like that. But if you got to leave, feel free to do it. On the content danger issue, I want to share just a quick story. I'll either get like worst dad in the universe award for this, or maybe it was smart. I don't know. So to illustrate to my kids, my boys, the danger, because obviously pornography is an issue. I'm not going to sit here and hide it. I've struggled with it in my life, and I've certainly struggled with it in this device. The reality of digital technology and access to free things like that. I'm guarantee in this room, if we shared stories, everybody's struggling. We're like struggling with the reality of a sexualized culture. And I took my boys in a room one day, and I sat them in the middle of a chair, and I had a butcher knife in my hand. And I had them close their eyes. Joshua was first, and I handed him the butcher knife with his eyes closed. And I said, "Flip the knife." And he's like, Dad, I'm not going to do it. Flip the knife. I'm not going to do it, Dad. And I said, Joshua, flip the knife. To the point where he's like now almost in tears. And I say, Joshua, I'm not going to have you flip the knife and try to catch it. I said, but just look at me. Every time you get on and you search on the internet, that's what you're doing. You're flipping the knife. You don't know what's going to come up. If you're searching images, Google images, what you're looking for, it's hard to control that. And it's hard to unsee something once you've seen it. And so I did that with Eli as well, to make a point. Guys, this is dangerous. You don't know exactly what you're going to see. It's so out of control in the ways, like you probably saw the Momo challenge. This is something that kind of went around about 3 weeks ago, where they were inserting this, I don't even know what was video of this character into videos, and it was causing kids to harm themselves, telling them not to tell their parents, but it was convincing them to harm themselves. So there's just all this stuff out there that we have to be concerned about. So I think about it and I go, content is certainly an issue. As it from a dad and from a cultural standpoint, like I'm concerned with the content they come in contact with. End of that story, Joshua came to me a few weeks later in tears and he's like, Dad, I saw something I can't unsee. And he sat across and we talked about it and I had him come over, I hugged him, I said, buddy, I'm in this with you. Like, I'm sorry that happened to you. I love you. We'll just fight the battle together, you know, because this is a little bit what we're up against, right? Anyway, just from a ground level type thing, anyway. So the question at the top right now, I have a 14-year-old son who grew up in the church and just recently came out as gay. He is suicidal too. My husband and I are terrified. Any ideas for help? I think my first response to this would be, this is a struggle, and I'm identifying empathy for the struggle and compassion for the challenge that you're facing with this. There are plenty of things out there for help. I would say I'm willing, if you want to approach me after, or I can give you my email. I would love to talk with you about this and come alongside, have our organization come alongside and provide resources and help on this. We would be willing to do that. I don't know that this is, primarily the format to be able to answer this as far as we can, but I would certainly like to talk to you if you want to approach me. If you're not comfortable approaching me after this, my email is ben@loveandtransformation.org, spelled out. Send me an email and I'll respond and we can connect and talk more fully about it. I'd love to come alongside you with that.
And just in case you don't come up, this is the real reason I was invited. You could always take your son or daughter to your loved one to an emergency room and be seen by a clinical therapist that will evaluate them and determine whether or not they're safe at that moment. So,
Yeah.
And there's all the 1-800 suicide hotlines too.
Yeah, I think certainly that's really important. If the person is actually in the middle of struggling with suicidal ideation or has a plan, or there's just grave concern, certainly, right, take them to the hospital. There's another organization, a helpline, Death to Life Revolution is a website, D2L Revolution, and there's anonymous chat counseling on there. A friend of mine, Mario in Phoenix, runs that organization, and they're doing incredible work. So there's tons of resources out there. We want to make sure that we get that to you if you need it. Scientific studies, let's see here. Anybody have a question from the audience wants to use the microphone? Are we doing okay here? We'll do a couple more, I think. What is the standard for a good kind of stress? How do we seek healthy stress to provide for growth without overstressing? A healthy kind of stress. Well, certainly there's lifting weights, right, which is a healthy kind of stress to build your muscles, which I don't participate in, by the way. Probably should. This is an interesting question.
I like this question a lot, so thanks for asking this one. There's a fascinating TED Talk that I think I can unreservedly recommend by a Scottish psychologist that figured out that it's not actually stress that's harmful to us, it's what we think about stress. And she did a really long study and with a very large sample, and I think followed people over 5 years. And it wasn't stress that was killing people, it's what you believed about stress. So when people are stressed out, they sweat and their heart rate goes up and they don't feel good. No one says I want more stress in my life, but it's actually what you believe about that. And if you think about it, sweating and your heart beating faster is preparing you to deal with whatever you're stressed out about, really. So my boss at the hospital setting, we nurses, doctors, social workers working in an ED is super stressful. So she was trying to show us that what you think about that stress is maybe more important than less stress or little stress. I think the psychologist even discovered it didn't. Even if you were under a extreme amount of stress, losing your job, losing your family, losing your spouse, moving, whatnot, there was no, and the metric they used was death. Like they went back to see who was dead after 5 years of believing that stress was very bad for you. So I don't think there's anything bad in that video. It's a TED Talk. I'm sorry, I can't remember. I would just put in, is stress bad for you? It is enlightening. And sorry if you feel like that's kind of going around the question. Back in the 80s, they talked about eustress, and I think that's the Latin EU for good or true, like eurythmia or the Eucharist. I think in general, some stress is good for us, or we'd never move or do anything. It's good to get up and have an issue to deal with. But I would also point you to thinking about stress, and what you think about it is pretty powerful.
You want to add anything to this, Cody?
This is somewhat anecdotal, but in the trials in my life, and this goes to what you were saying, I think one has to, healthy stress to me is believing that it's in the trials is where God works. It's through the difficult components in our life that the greatest goods have occurred to me. And so that is just my perception of turmoil and difficult patches in my life, is that is where I feel closest to God. But that's
Well,
just
and I
me
think
personally.
from a philosophical and cultural standpoint, like a lot of this generation has been told from the start, you can be whatever you want to be, you're special, you can have it all. And if you don't, it's like this thing, if you're not happy, then you're mentally ill. There's like no negative reality allowed. Like unless everything is going well all the time, if something starts to not go well, then something's wrong with you. Well, life is struggle. There's a lot of suffering and difficulty that happens in life, and we need to build the type of structural integrity in our character to deal with the demands of reality. When stress goes up, to be able to withstand kind of what's going on, and that's a process. But if you're kind of told that it's supposed to go good all the time, where is the struggle actually happen? So there is a place of good stress, and I don't know. The one thing that I would say is I was with a friend recently, and we were talking about Instagram, and he's like, yeah, I go on and off Instagram. And he's like, when I'm on Instagram and I have followers and things like that, I feel the pressure to post. And then I said, stop right there. I said, when you go off Instagram, what goes away? The pressure or the stress with feeling like you need to be consistently engaging or interacting or live in that. Well, when the pressure goes away, you don't think about the fact that it's gone. It's just gone. And that's a good thing, I think. We have to be able to regulate and manage, set the boundaries that we need.
If I had to pick for my children whether or not they had a life of leisure with no problems or stresses to figure out, I would pick stresses for them to figure out.
I think that's good. You learn a lot. All right, so how do we use our smartphones as a tool to love others well? I really like this question, and I'll couple it with, there was one other one. Should we encourage and guide youth to use technology to reach others with the word and try to prevent mental health issues? So let's be clear about something. I think you guys would concur with this. The technology itself is not evil, right? This is a tool. It's neutral. It can be used for good. It can be used for evil. It's a device. And there are ways I think we can facilitate loving others while using it. One of the most intimate forms of communication today, in an interesting way, is text message. I just remember when I was working in the competitive athletic world, like if I had a text relationship with someone, I knew that I had their trust and I was in an inner circle, and I could communicate with them there in a way that could be encouraging. They could share their struggles. We could talk about life, whatever it was. And so there are ways to use it. I think anything, from my standpoint, I was a part of building a digital technology platform in sports at one point that was designed to have like a locker room. It would have a weekly plan that pumped out for spiritual development and athletic development on both sides. It was designed for golf. We had unique content in there from the pros, and then we also had encouragement in there for them to grow spiritually. But that whole platform was designed to eventually come out of the digital space into connected relationships with people. And so I think making sure that we close that loop if we can in relationship is really important. That's my thought on it. I don't build the stuff. I just think about ways to use it, but I think there are ways. Communication has changed, and we have to find a way to love people while using what we have at our fingertips. Cody? I'm not the one who makes it. Can you love someone with an iPhone or Android or, Apple Watch?
I'm struggling a little bit. The question seems really general to me, in the sense that I can't tell if this is really from a technology perspective.
Well, how do we use digital technology to love others well?
Yeah, I mean, in this sense, I think it really is just a tool. It's a vehicle that you can use just like the written word, the verbal word. It's just a tool. I think that the ability to communicate is, there are no barriers in communication with technology. So at this point in time, we really have no excuse not to be able to express who we are and what we believe to other people. I mean, we don't just represent our Christianity locally, but we can do it globally. And that obviously has negative effects in the inverse, but it can also have positive effects going out, so.
I think so. We have literally 2 minutes. I think we'll probably close this up. I mean, I'd love to go through and answer some of these questions. I'll hang around after. I'm sure these guys will if you want to come up and talk to us, if there's other things you want to mention. I think in a room this size, with the reality of the way things are today, there's probably someone here who's struggling. Anxiety, depression, potentially suicidal ideation. If you are in here and you're struggling, like I mentioned, Death to Life Revolution, d2lrevolution.com. You can go there if you don't want to talk to anybody, you can get counseling. If you want to talk to somebody, do not hesitate. Come talk to me. I would be glad to spend time with you and help you in any way that I can. I just want to make sure that you all know that that's available to you. Before we leave, we'd like to probably give a couple resources, just if you're interested in reading on some of these topics. The one I brought with me is a book that has meant a ton to me. It's called The Lost Virtue of Happiness by J.P. Moreland from Talbot. I mentioned him earlier. This book, the first 27 pages, diagnoses our culture in a way that is pretty amazing and helps people to really understand what happiness is truly and biblically, a biblical view of happiness, not pitting it against joy and saying that it's something else, but actually what is happiness really, but then also a lifestyle. How do we then go on to live that out in the kind of culture that we exist in? So if you like to read, this is a tremendous resource. I continue to source it in my life on a regular basis. I know that you have a couple.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say there was a question up there about sort of how do we respond or how do we combat the effects of technology on us as individuals in society? And it's interesting. There's a book, I'm sure many of you know what it's or have read this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. This was written in the 80s. Has anybody read this book? This author of this book is as close to a prophet as I think I've seen in modern time. Essentially, we are a society that consumes, and so we consume entertainment, and we choose to be consumers of information and ideas, and we don't ever engage it. And so to that question that was asked about combating, the way you combat that, the way you combat constantly consuming apps and information and pictures and images and text is you've got to set stuff that you're just, cheap entertainment that amuses us is sort of killing us. And the way you combat that, in my mind, is you have to read, you have to think.
Stress your brain
Right, you have to read well, think well, and write well.
beyond overload.
Like these three things are being cast aside in favor of a society that just consumes. And this guy talked about in the 80s. This year, a guy based off Postman's work wrote this book called Digitized, Spiritual Implications of Technology, and it works off Postman's ideas. And it's a sort of a guidebook on how, if you're really interested in how we act as Christians in this technology age, it has a lot of prescriptions and answers. But I just want to say, and I mean, I'm speaking to myself here a lot, is I have to regulate how much time I spend consuming information instead of thinking about it and writing about it and doing it myself. And that's what we have to train our kids to do. That's what I think.
Well, yeah, we're done. Guys, thank you for being such a great audience and using the app.
Three quick things before we go. Number one is that this is the start of the conversation, not the end. So although we are closing tonight, in the same way that the Bible tells us to do things as we sit at home or walk along the road, we want this conversation to continue on. So talk with your friends, talk with those you see at church, come talk to these guys, but let this conversation continue. The second thing is that our phones are a minefield, and if you need help right now, don't hold that back in. Talk to people, talk about your needs. I don't care if you're 80 or 20 or 10. We have so many things that are changing so quickly that asking for help is a way to get help. So please don't be afraid to do that. The third thing is, if you feel like you need to come talk to Ben, I would encourage you to do so. We've had some great questions up here that clearly were not ready to be answered in a 3-minute soundbite. Those are big things. However, I do have this word of caution. Ben's going to have a lot of folks that want to talk to him. So he's not ready to counsel each person in depth right here afterward. So what I would encourage you to do is be sensitive. If Ben says, hey, let's get together and talk in the future, that might be a nice way to say there's 10 people behind you in line. Right now is not the time to have a full conversation. So consider that. I'll pray for us, and then we'll be excused. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we are grateful to be here, to have the means in which we can just remember how you have made us to be blessed and to be happy in you. But we can be distracted by so many things. I want to lift up anyone here in this neighborhood, in this city, and across the world struggling with anxiety, depression, suicide. We know, Lord, that you provide answers, but oftentimes it will take us time to see them. So be at work, God, in our midst. Thank you for the guys